Hello, respective viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Well, there's a triple whammy of evidence that Russia's influence was on the wane this week. Now, the Gaza war has ended somewhat. I mean, Israel has murdered 23 people in Gaza since the ceasefire, claiming that Hamas has broken the ceasefire. Hamas in that time hasn't killed an Israeli or tried to, or wounded an Israeli or tried to. What on earth has it done that's remotely equivalent to that? But imagine if Hamas had murdered 23 Israelis since then. But coming back to the subject, the Gaza Summit in Egypt, with world leaders from many other countries around are invited, countries which don't border Palestine or Israel, like Armenia, even a small, not very wealthy country of Armenia, only not even 3 million people, even they were invited, and Putin's not. That's got to be a two fingers to him, saying that he's more or less irrelevant in the region. I do mean more or less. I don't mean totally irrelevant because, Russia with, say, almost 2% of the world's population, with nuclear weapons, with a lot of oil and gas, cannot say to be that irrelevant. It still has an air base and a naval base in Syria, finding that increasingly difficult to operate, which is why one of its submarines went into difficulty in the Mediterranean Sea, can't get in and out of the Bosphorus from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, has from the beginning of the war, because Turkey, as per the Montreux Convention, has closed it to the warships of belligerent nations. And then, so Russia was due to host its own summit with Arab nations. I am Irish. Surprise, surprise. You really need to ask, how could you be from Ireland but not Irish? I mean, you might be born in Ireland to non-Irish parents, not considered so Irish, whatever. But yeah, I'm Irish by any definition. But that summit has been cancelled due to lack of interest because so people were going to go. Is an absolute humiliation. And Putin is all about ego, feeling that there's no support out of joint, when obviously Russia was a basket case in the 90s. We used to laugh at it, mostly, yes, I am Gallic, but we can't really say, because who could distinguish who arrived in the 5th century BC, or might not Tuatha De Danann or Firbolg or whatever, the other pre-Gaelic Celts. But almost inevitably there'd be some of that. I was speaking to someone about it the other day. We simply imagined that everybody who was in Ireland prior to Strongbow was a Gael. And I'm not sure how we can distinguish the Gaels from the other pre-Gaelic Celtic people are not a Dane. And we're all mixed and gathering, so quite a lot of Gaelic, probably more than anything else. Did I abandon? I didn't abandon any part of England, but I suppose, almost everyone in Ireland's got some English ancestry. You're messing. Well, you see, that's a real Hibernicism. Back to the topic. But Ahmed al-Sharaa, the president of Syria, he's visited Moscow. I remember when he was anathema, who was absolutely evil, all the atrocities that Russia denied being committed by Assad's forces were committed, and Assad was the only one to save civilization until he wasn't. And Russia just rolled over and accepted Sharaa. Admittedly, he was on a US terrorist watch list, but it shows these lists are somewhat arbitrary, and also people can change. There must be absolution. So he's visited Moscow. So that's a bit of a win for Russia. But obviously, if he didn't curry favor with the Ruskies, they could still cause trouble. They got those 2 military bases. Now, the Syrians could make it difficult. The Russians obliged to withdraw. Russia could create merry hell before that, and arm any regime remnants this side, that side. There's still a few armed remnants. Israel's already illegally occupying some of Syria. Syria's absolutely wrecked civil war since 2011. Would like Russia to pay them more money because they urgently need it, and refugees coming back. And more signs of Russian weakness. So their Arab summit was not going ahead because nobody was going to go. And they're not even invited to the Gaza summit. And then apologizing to Azerbaijan. The Republic of Azerbaijan, of course, a former Soviet republic. So Russia's sort of near abroad as they would see its sphere of influence. And they've leaned more towards the Azerbaijanis because they have to, because it's much bigger and more powerful than Armenia. Russia's thrown their Armenian allies to the wolves since then. And this new peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Russia's not even consulted Azerbaijan to have a road to connect the major portion of Azerbaijan to their exclave of Nakhchivan. And that was brokered by the United States. We'll see if that works out. How they don't give up the Ruskies, the indefatigability. But sometimes they shouldn't even start, as in this illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. So what else? Russia ought to withdraw from there, and then the world be a much better, happier place. So they apologized about shooting down that Azerbaijan aircraft a year ago. Now, the Kremlin's default setting is to lie and lie and lie and lie. no matter how absolutely overwhelmingly blatant the evidence. But they are relatively weak, and they don't want to irk Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan could be more helpful to Ukraine, could send them humanitarian aid, financial aid, if not military aid. Azerbaijan's got a very cordial relationship with Israel, despite being a Muslim country. They're Shia Muslims, so they really dislike the Islamic Republic of Iran, and so on. They don't want Azerbaijan to be more favorable to the West, to try and move towards the EU or NATO. Now, Azerbaijan's a dictatorship, never going to get into the European Union unless there's a complete regime change, and is not even talked about joining NATO, but they don't want some sort of interoperability agreement, joining partnership for peace or anything like that. So that's why they've had to eat humble pie and fess up that they did shoot down this Azerbaijani plane. And Russia just doesn't have the headspace, doesn't have the diplomatic clout to bend the Azerbaijanis to their will, doesn't have very much money to offer, doesn't have any military force to threaten with them over there. Everything's in Ukraine. There have been some military demonstrations around other smaller NATO countries. And you are always knowledgeable. Thank you so much. So that's a diminution of Russia's sway. Remember, the whole thing was to make Russia a superpower again. And had they conquered Ukraine very easily, well, that might have worked. But here we are 3.5 years on. They're nowhere near Kyiv. Kyiv, they would have taken 2 days. And their offensive is stalling. But, they've dealt some mighty strokes of war to Ukrainians. Ukrainians are suffering. They've taken out electricity. Most of the Ukrainians managed to get it back online, but it is going to be a chilly winter. Now, this didn't work for Russia the previous 3 winters. Why would it work this one? I mean, I don't think it will, but it'll give the Ukrainians a very uncomfortable time. And there's so many drones, and Ukrainian air defense can't cope. Okay, of course, you can never shoot them all down, but there are times they're shooting down about 95% of them, and they weren't doing that much damage, killing about 3 civilians in a major attack on Kyiv in one night. And obviously that's terrible. Nobody would be killed. But honestly, this was not going to turn the tide, but it may get more difficult for them. Well, the Tomahawks that the United States is threatening to give, I mean, everything's going to be a game, we've said to be a game changer. This one won't be, but it will help the Ukrainians significantly, which is why the Russians are lobbying very hard against it. I think that's why Putin really wants to meet Trump in Hungary. He'd like to meet him anyway. I think it raises prestige, but to talk him out of it, saying he's a bit worried that Trump's met Zelensky. Trump disagrees with the last person he spoke to. Zelensky's talked him round. Could he persuade him not to? And that's what these blood-curdling threats out of Medvedev and others, because they recognize it's very bad news for them. But everything's an escalation, of course, in Russia. But what do? Nothing. On the other hand, when Russia really does escalate, of course, NATO proves itself to be pathetically pusillanimous, with all these violations of airspace by warplanes, by drones, and so on, and not being shot down. At least the drones, you could shoot them down and not kill anybody. So Russia has really lost sway in the world, is less consequential than it was before, has rather few friends, and that's all Putin's fault. The exact opposite of what he wanted to achieve. Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, PayPal, george@gmail.com. Goodbye.